And they further engage, quote, to labor by all means lawful to recover the purity and liberty of the gospel as it was established and professed before the foresaid novations, unquote. 'Tis plain that by the above words of the bond, the 5 Articles of Perth, the government of the kirk by bishops, etc., are virtually condemned. In regard they are called novations, and under the foresaid novations that purity and liberty of the gospel, as it was formerly established and professed, was wanting. But yet the general meetings do not expressly condemn the above novations as contrary to the confession of faith, but refer the question to the determination of a free and lawful general assembly. In regard, severals doubted if the novations mentioned were contrary to our national confession of faith, and as the general meetings did not act in a judicative capacity, so they thought it proper to refer the question to the determination of an assembly, especially when they had now the hopes of having such a free and lawful assembly to whom they might safely refer a question of this nature. But it is here to be noticed that such as were in the dark upon this question were willing to submit the same to the trial and determination of a free and lawful assembly, and hereby they likewise declared themselves willing to lie open until light upon the above important question. The Latin historian mentions them as a considerable number, who either reckoned the aforesaid novations indifferent, or who doubted if they were condemned by our national confession of faith. But as that learned author was the only member of the assembly at Glasgow who did hesitate when the questions were determined concerning the government of the kirk by bishops and the 5 Articles of Perth, so he seems to magnify the numbers, as is evident from what is already observed concerning the proceedings of the General Assembly, and may yet more fully appear from what I am further to offer upon what passed this year. Besides what concerned the above-mentioned novations, the bond subjoined to the covenant contains a qualified allegiance to the king, that is, an engagement to, quote, stand to the defense of our dread sovereign, the king's majesty, his person and authority, in the defense and preservation of the foresaid true religion, liberties, and laws of the kingdom, unquote. As also they bind themselves to the mutual defense and assistance one of another in the same cause of maintaining the true religion and his majesty's authority. They likewise, quote, swear by the great name of the Lord their God to continue in the profession and obedience of the foresaid religion, and that they shall defend the same and resist all the contrary errors and corruptions specified according to their vocation and to the utmost of that power that God hath put in their hands all the days of their life, unquote. In like manner they bind themselves to a life and conversation as beseemeth Christians who have renewed their covenant with God, and that both in public and in their particular families and personal carriage they shall endeavor to keep themselves within the bounds of their Christian liberty, and also to be good examples to others of all godliness, soberness, and righteousness, and of every duty to God and man. As the above is the sum and substance of the bond which the general meetings at Edinburgh subjoined, so the covenant with the said bond was sworn with great solemnity in the 1st of March, 1638, in the Grey Friars Church of Edinburgh. The flower of the nation were present. The slower of the nation were present. This solemn meeting consisted of the nobility, of the barons and gentlemen from the several shires and burgesses from the burghs, with ministers and others, and thereafter copies of the covenant were sent through the whole nation. According to the Latin historian, it was sworn through the whole land before the end of April, except by papists, who were then but a very inconsiderable party, as also excepting such who were addicted to the English ceremonies, and who favoured the book of canons and liturgy, amongst whom he reckons the Aberdeen doctors and ministers. He mentions also others who, at their entrance into the ministry, had engaged to the observance of the Articles of Perth. But the Apologetical Relation reports in page 47, quote, that in a short time few in all the land did refuse, except some papists, some aspiring courtiers who had no will to displease the king, some who were addicted unto the English rites and ceremonies, and some few ministers who had sworn the oath at their entry appointed by the Parliament anon 1612, unquote. Mr. Rapin informs us, quote, that the innovations induced into the church for 30 or 40 years past were disapproven by almost the whole kingdom, unquote. And having insert the above-mentioned bond, he adds, quote, this covenant, like an alarm bell, brought all the Scots together that were dissatisfied with the government, that is, almost the whole nation. It was subscribed by the great men and the people, except the privy councillors, the judges, the bishops, and such ministers as were dignitaries in the church." Unquote. I have already given an account from the letter to the churches in Helvetia, after what manner the covenant was sworn at this time. Though the said testimony is sufficient, yet I shall subjoin a few more, who take notice, not only of mourning, but also of great joy through the land upon this solemn occasion, with great readiness and willingness in coming under the oath of God. The first I shall mention is Bishop Guthrie in his Memoirs, page 30, where he tells us that, quote, "Upon the 1st of March 1638, they being all assembled in the Greyfriars Church and churchyard, the covenant was publicly read and subscribed by them all with much joy and shouting." He adds, "The Archbishop of St. Andrews, being then returned from Stirling to Edinburgh, when he heard what was done, said, Now all that we have been doing these 30 years past is thrown down at once." Unquote. The Apologetic Relation, page 48, informs us, quote, "that the covenant being read in the churches was heartily embraced and sworn and subscribed with tears and great joy." Unquote. He adds, "Great was this day of the Lord's power, for much willingness and cheerfulness was among the people." Likewise, Masters Alexander Henderson and David Dixon, in their first answer to the replies of the Aberdeen doctors and ministers, say, quote, "And for that which displeaseth you in our way, that we deal after such a manner with people to come, quote, in, that is, to the covenant, we answer, that we have seen in this land the day of the Lord's power, wherein his people have most willingly offered themselves in multitudes like the dew of the morning, that others of no small note have offered their subscriptions and have been refused, till time should try that they join in sincerity, from love to the cause, and not from the fear of men, and that no threatenings have been used except of the deserved judgment of God, nor force except the force of reason, from the high respects which we owe to religion, to our king, to our native country, to ourselves, and to the posterity, which hath been to some a greater constraint than any external violence, and we wish may also prevail with you." Unquote. And from the foresaid answers we may also see that this solemn work was carried on with fasting and humiliation through the land. In the first and 11th answers 'tis said that the Aberdeen ministers declined to concur with the rest of the clerks of the kingdom in public humiliation and fasting. I shall only add the testimony of that eminent minister, Mr. Livingston, who in his life writ by himself, page 22, reports, quote, "I was present at Lanark and several other parishes, when, on a Sabbath after the forenoon's sermon, the covenant was read and sworn, and may truly say that in all my lifetime, except one day at the Kirk of Shotts, I never saw such motion from the Spirit of God, all the people generally and most willingly concurring. I have seen more than 1,000 persons all at once lifting up their hands, and the tears falling down from their eyes, so that through the whole land, except the professed papists, and some few who for base ends adhered to the prelates, the people universally entered into the covenant of God for the reformation of religion against prelates and the ceremonies." Unquote. Reader, stop here, and behold the nobility, the barons, the burghers, the ministers, the commons, and all sorts in Scotland, all in tears for their breach of covenant, and for their backsliding and defection from the Lord, and at the same time returning with great joy unto their God, by swearing cheerfully and willingly to be the Lord's. It may well be said of this day, Great was the day of Jezreel. It was a day wherein the arm of the Lord was revealed, a day wherein the princes of the people were assembled to swear fealty and allegiance to that great King whose name is the Lord of hosts. It was the day of the Redeemer's power, wherein his volunteers stowed unto him, even the day wherein his youth were like the dew from the womb of the morning. If we compare our present times with the above day of the right hand of the Most High, may we not take up a lamentation over our land and cry, "Ah, Scotland, Scotland, how is thy gold become dim? How is thy most fine gold changed? Where is that zeal Where is that zeal for the Redeemer's honor and glory that was once warm in the breasts of thy nobility, thy barons, thy ministers and commons? Where is that heroic courage and resolution for the cause of Christ, as well as for the liberties of the nation, that did at this time animate all ranks of persons through the land? Where art thou now? Ah, how much funk in great degeneracy and defection from the Lord! Can these dry bones in Scotland live? The Lord only knoweth. The residue of the Spirit is with him. It becomes us to acknowledge that we have sinned, and that we have dealt treacherously in his covenant, and that he is righteous and holy in restraining his Spirit from us. It is likewise our duty to wait upon the Lord, who hideth his face from the house of Jacob. The town of Aberdeen was the only place of any consideration in Scotland that declined to join in the covenant, being very much under the influence of their ministers, who all adhered to the prelatic interest. Therefore, the general meetings at Edinburgh sent Masters Alexander Henderson, David Dixon, and Andrew Cant to that town, to deal with ministers and people in a brotherly and friendly manner, to join with the church and kingdom in the covenant lately sworn. And when the said ministers came to Aberdeen, as they report in the preface to their answers to the Aberdeen doctors and ministers, they were altogether refused the pulpits and kirks, and therefore they preached in a convenient place for 2 Sabbaths, and delivered their message to the audience of many, and they found that their labor was not in vain in the Lord. Quote, "For, say they, diverse persons of special note, both for place and wisdom, with willing heart and great readiness of mind, did publicly put their hands to the covenant." Unquote. The king being informed of the proceedings at Edinburgh, and of the renovation of the national covenant through the land, he sent down the Marquis of Hamilton as his High Commissioner of Scotland. The Marquis was invested with this eminent character, as Mr. Rapin reports, because the king imagined, quote, he would by his credit and industry reduce the people of Scotland to his obedience, without giving them any real satisfaction, being still very unwilling to desist from his projects. Unquote. When the Marquis came down to Scotland, he demanded that they should deliver up and renounce their subscribed covenant. This they all honestly and boldly refused to do. Then the Marquis demanded that what might be expected from them for returning to their former obedience to the king. They replied that they could not return to his Majesty's obedience, in regard they had never departed from it, and in the meantime they insisted for a free assembly and parliament. When the Marquis could not prevail upon the general meetings to give up their subscribed covenant, he did, before he returned to court, publish a declaration from the king, bearing date at Greenwich, the 28th of June this year. This declaration was designed more to amuse than to give any real satisfaction. By it, the proceedings of the meetings at Edinburgh are condemned under the name of disorders and great disorders, and the king's mind with respect to the book of canons, the liturgy, and high commission court is declared in very doubtful and general terms. Upon the publishing of the above declaration, a protestation is read against it at the Cross of Edinburgh, in the name of the noblemen, barons, etc. I find from a copy of this protestation before me printed in the year 1638 that instruments were taken thereupon, in the hands of the 3 notars, by the Earl of Castles, in name of the noblemen, by Mr. Gibson of Durry, in the name of the barons, by the Provost of Dundee, in the name of the boroughs, and by Mr. Kerr at Salt Preston, in the name of the ministers, and by Mr. Archibald Johnston, afterwards Lord Warston, in name of all who adhered to the confession of faith and covenant lately renewed within this kingdom. In the above protestation, after several weighty grounds and reasons laid down against the king's declaration, they declare their adherence to the whole of our Reformation, notwithstanding of any innovations introduced, either of old or of late, as also their adherence to the grievances, supplications, and protestations given in at assemblies and parliaments, and to their late complaints, supplications, and protestations, etc., and likewise their hearty adherence to their oath and subscription to the confession of faith, solemn covenant between God and his church, and this church and kingdom. And in like manner they justify all their former proceedings, and protest against any act or deed of the Privy Council carrying an approbation of the king's declaration as unjust, illegal, and null, and offer to submit their cause to the first free general assembly of the church and parliament of the estates.